In the property space, we're constantly talking and told about location, and we all know that buying close to the city, buying close to the beach, buying the big capital cities and buying the big regional markets in Australia is what's worked in the past. But in this video, we wanted to explore 4 very particular ideas that aren't talked about much online or on the podcast so that you can not just take advantage of a good location, but have data and logic to back up your next decision. You go get a stick and Mum will get your marshmallow.
And once we finish this video, we'll light one up.
Hey Mama, do you want to get a marshmallow for Katie?
Yeah, the first reason that I want to just say is that the power is in the land, and we talk about this all the time. You know, there's books written about this sort of stuff as well. And if you just look at history, it always suggests that the power is in the land, not what's sitting on top of it. And the easiest way to understand it is like, when your asset appreciates in value, it's the land that's going up in value because the actual house or whatever is on top of that land is depreciating in value.
It's crazy when you think about it, like, because over a 40-year period, the Australian government will write down the value of a home to literally $0. So it's important to know that and to effectively find the biggest piece of land in the best location possible. I remember reading Phil Anderson's book and some of his work outside of that book, and he talked about, you know, this isn't just a new thing. This has been happening for hundreds of years. It's like the early settlers that were coming from London and England and the UK to America were like basing where they settled when America was a free country, and you could literally just stake your claim if you were the first to it.
How are those days?
Around the best locations, the best farmland, the best access to, you know, there weren't even ports back then, just to rivers and stuff like that, the most protected coastlines. So we've always done this. The strongest tribes always had the best piece of land that were the most fertile and the most easier to raise kids on. So it's just a natural flow and effect of that.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at like very resource rich countries, you look at the Middle East with the amount of oil that they've got underneath and how wealthy they became because of that. And it just obviously makes sense. It's a scarce resource. There's only a finite amount of land available on Earth. And, you know, the more of it that gets developed, the more of it, the more expensive that it's obviously going to become. So number one, obviously the power is in the land. So the more of it that you can control, the better. And another example for that is what I want to talk about is last year in 2020 when they announced the First Home Builders Grant, where they said $25,000 to build your first home, which was a massive incentive to get people into the market. But what we literally saw is realestate.com advertisements go up $25,000 almost as soon as those grants got announced, which is insane. So it didn't actually help the first home buyers. The only person that it helped was the landowners. So the power is always in the land, number one. Now, number two is probably one of my favorite things on the bloody planet, which is compound growth. Now, this is something that is very, very, very rarely talked about, but something that Ben and I are completely obsessed with. So let's run through a bit of an example of the difference between maybe a 4% compound growth return over a 15-year period compared to a 6% return.
Yeah, you know, this is why location matters so much, and that is because better locations get slightly better average annual performance, and slight differences in performance over 15 years, which we'll talk about in a moment, can result in hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference. So let's say that you go buy a 500k home in Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, anywhere in Australia where that's still possible. We probably could do $1 million example as well, but I just don't have the numbers off the top of my head because that would work for Melbourne and Sydney.
Exactly, my bad.
But let's say that we go and buy a 500k home today and we hold it for 15 years. And in one example, it goes up by 4% per annum. The value of that 500k home in 15 years is going to be 900k, which happy days, you know, that's amazing.
It's better than it going backwards, right? But
Yeah, and if we look at the long-term history of Australia, I think in Mastering the Australian Housing Market, John Lindemann suggested that houses had almost gone up by 11% a year for the last 100 years or something crazy. So we're being super, super, super conservative here. But if that same decision to buy a slightly better location with a bigger land component in a better city, beachside or major regional market location was to get you a 6% return, and I'm talking about choosing maybe a 600 square metre block over a 400, maybe choosing a slightly better suburb than a weaker suburb, a slightly better market than a weaker market. At 6%, that same $500,000 over 15 years turns into $1,198,000. Now, it might not seem like a lot, but that one decision to choose better location is $298,000 difference on your net profit or net position based on one single decision. Now, what if it was $1 million?
Yeah.
The difference would be almost $600,000. It is insane, and this is why location matters so much.
Yeah, seriously, like it's the same money, it's the same amount of time, just making a smarter decision.
Yeah.
So, you know, really important to take that into consideration. And then the third point is more about how quality matters. So you kind of just went into it a little bit there, but you know, when you're identifying that location, quality really does matter, and that's what makes the difference between that 4 to 6% return. Hey, Malibu. So what we're sort of talking about there is buying into those locations that, you know, have something more to offer, right? So
A better school.
Yep.
Better access to jobs, better access to infrastructure, better transport, a better location, a better city, a better market.
Better lifestyle factors,
Surrounded by higher quality homes. All of these things with location matter.
Social status even, you know,
Yeah.
like that's a massive thing in Australia. Like everybody wants to own their own home. Like it's almost a birthright, which is awesome. But at the same time, there's that social status, and you can use that to your advantage to get into those slightly higher quality locations. So when I'm investing, I'm always looking at how much money the average person earns in the area, what the average age is in the area, what type of schools they have, and the quality of those schools as well, because all of these things could have an impact on that 1 to 2% extra growth compounded over a longer period of time. And as we've talked about, on 500 grand, that could be a $200,000 decision. On $1 million, that could be a $500,000 decision just to do that extra little bit of research.
You know, what I love about a market like Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Darwin, you know, unfortunately we've sort of missed the boat on Hobart, Sydney and Melbourne at the moment because they've already had such good performance, is just this concept of like neighbouring suburbs and the domino effect around locations. So you can strategically pick off areas, and I'll talk about this as part 4 more in a sec, but strategically pick off areas that have yet to perform. So let's have a look at like southeast Brisbane.
Yep.
There's some beachside suburbs like Manly that you're looking at $1 million for a high quality home.
Yeah, on a decent street.
You could be not that much further away from the city in something like a Redland Bay and getting the same thing that you'd pay for $1 million a little bit closer to the city for 500K right now. Or, you know, another part of the southern side of Brisbane where you could be looking at a suburb like Shayla Park, and for a beautiful renovated home on 1,000 square metres in that suburb, you might be looking at 750K right now. And then literally across the road, a kilometre away, you could be at something like a Slacks Creek, and you could be legitimately buying the property right there for 400K. Or the suburb next to Slacks Creek, like a Woodridge, and you could be paying 250 to 300K. And so it's important as we start to think about location, we're not just thinking demographics or history or the standard benefits, but also where has a market performed at. So we got some incredible information from Jeremy Shepherd recently, and effectively he looked at markets in Australia over a 20-year period, and not just the market, but thousands of markets in Australia.
And I love it because we're long-term investors as well. Like 20 years is a good like sample size to look at to understand how a market actually performs. Like the days of a market doubling every 10 years are gone, guys.
Gone. So what he found is that, so let's say on one axis of the graph we've got performance, and on the other axis we've got 20 years of time. Now what he found is the markets that had performed extremely well in the first 10 years of a 20-year cycle in the second 10 years, they would not perform quite as well. And we've seen that so many times in the past with your Sydneys, your Melbournes, your Brisbane. Sydney and Melbourne have performed extremely well in the last 10 years. And history would say, or based on his research and data, that maybe there's not as much upside potential as that first 10-year gain over the next 10. Now, as we move forward, markets on the flip side that have underperformed over the last 10 years seem to do much better in the second half. So your Brisbanes, your Perth that have been literally flat for 10 years have got a much better chance of performing. Now, when I overlaid Homely and CoreLogic's data over 50 years against this idea, it was absolutely insane.
It was on point.
Absolutely on point. And Jeremy's done such a bigger sample size. So I think why this matters around location is it's not just good enough to buy a location and hope, but you also want to look at, well, which city has underperformed in the last 10 years and which has potential over the next 10, and then which suburb within that city. Somewhere like a Newstead in Brisbane might have already gone up by 9% a year for the last 10 years, and then a suburb down the road like Arana Hills might have only gone up by 2% a year. So it's within the city, choosing the location that's not just going to get the long-term value, but has underperformed to take advantage of the next 10 years and best set your family up over that time.
So it's really about an all-encompassing method. You know, it's not one size fits all. There's no silver bullet with property investing. You've got to look at a bunch of different data points. You've got to look at a bunch of different factors and couple them together to make smarter decisions. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I certainly want to be on the side that ends up with a 6% return rather than a 4% return over the lifetime of holding that property. Like, if it just takes spending that tiny little bit of additional time researching the market, you know, looking at these data points, looking at the 10-year performance, looking at the schools, buying like a nice bigger piece of land rather than sacrificing a smaller piece of land, all of these things are going to impact that longer term performance of your investment. And, you know, I'm just trying to get the best ROI while I hold that asset.
You know, we're not planning on going out there and buying heaps and heaps of property. We just want a good portfolio that will give us long-term capital growth and strong cash flow once we own it outright. And we'd like to have that passive income for life so that we can make better choices and live more of our values on a day-to-day basis and spend more time with the people we care about. So if you align with that sort of stuff, we would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. All you need to do is jump over to www.pumpedonproperty.com and book in the session, and then you can talk with myself, Simon, or one of the team members about where you are today, where you do honestly see yourself or yourself and your family in 15 years or yourself and your partner, and then we can educate you on the market. We really specialise up here in Southeast Queensland. If you like the idea of taking that information and smashing it on your own, then we wish you all the best. Or if you would like to become one of the small number of people we work with each month, we'd love to talk further about that. But either way, location is so important, and we truly wish you all the best on this journey. As Simon said, like, the biggest mistakes that we've made is not spending that extra, 3 months, 6 months, getting the right strategy, getting the right place and targeting the right market, and sort of rushing in and just buying something because we thought that would be good enough long term. So we want above average returns for you, and we think you deserve it.
Fucking marshmallow. Drop. You little shit.
Sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good.